All right. Senator Scott Jensen. He's going to be speaking with us tonight. He's the founder and president of Catalyst Medical Clinic in Watertown, where he's a family physician. He's here tonight with his wife, Mary, who is a doctor of veterinary, right? Did I say that right? All right. Thank you, Mary, for being here. In 2015, Dr. Jensen published his first book called Relationship Matters. It is real-life patient stories to emphasize the critical value of patient-doctor relationships and the need for patients, all of us, to be our own best champion in healthcare decisions and desires. And in 2016, Dr. Jensen received the prestigious annual award, Minnesota Family Physician of the Year, from the Minnesota Academy of Family Physicians. Also in 2016, he was elected to the Minnesota State Senate, representing Senate District 47, more commonly known as Carver County. He's authored numerous bills, including the Insulin Safety Net Bill. Videos of Dr. Jensen went viral when he openly discussed his concern about the CDC's guidelines on what was considered a COVID-19 death, how the COVID death totals could be inflated, and a possible profit motive to do so. He's been interviewed by Laura Ingraham on Fox. How many of you have seen him there? And to us, he's a hero of truth and common sense. But alas, he's twice been given notice from the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice that his license was under review of allegations regarding his public comments, and they were filed against him. But talking all about this, and on an article that was titled How to Live with COVID and Not For It, is Senator Scott Jensen, MD.
Thank you very much. Way back in the room, can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. My name is Scott Jensen. I grew up in a little town called Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. There was a mantra in Sleepy Eye, and that was, it takes a village to raise a child. And I certainly learned that if I tried to get away with something on the north end of town, it didn't take long for my mom on the south end of town to find out. I also learned that if you're going to pick a fight with your older sister who is larger and stronger than you, that you were a fool. And we also said that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So my father was my hero, and actually he was in the Senate, and he sat in this desk that Senator Bruce Anderson sits in now today. Senator Anderson, could you stand? In many ways, Senator Anderson reminds me of my father. He carries himself with dignity. He's a man of few words, but when he speaks, you're best off listening. My mom was my best friend, and she died early in her 40s of colon cancer. My mom and I had always had a dream that I would go into dental school and become an orthodontist, and I would move teeth around like an architect might try to design buildings. So when Mom died, just as I was getting into dental school, and I found that I was having a problem in dental school, I didn't have her to go to. The problem I had in dental school wasn't a small thing. It was that I found out that I really didn't like teeth. So at that point in time, I did the logical thing. I obtained a leave of absence, and I went to the seminary to sort of sort things out. In the seminary, I made two big decisions. The first one was I thought, I'm going to ask my girlfriend if she would marry me. Girlfriend, would you stand up? 42 years. We have 3 children. Christy is an anesthesiologist, and Matt is a state attorney, and Jackie's a family physician. I also decided that year to go into medicine. And so when I went into medicine, I already had a passion. I knew that I wanted to be a family physician. I knew that I thought that the key to being a good doctor is build relationships at work. The best way to build a relationship is if a physician can demonstrate to their patient that they will advocate for them in all things. Whether you're talking about vaccines, whether you're talking about choosing to take a vaccine or not, or whatever else. And if I do my job well advocating for my patient will learn to trust me. And between that trust and advocacy, that's where the best healthcare takes place. So, fast forward, 2015, my wife and I decided to take perhaps the most momentous trip of our lives. We went to Israel and walked for 12 days the steps of Jesus. We got back on April 30th, and on May 5th, Joe Hoppy, a representative, called and asked me if I would run for the Senate seat. I told him that as a physician, I thought that he was smoking too much, and whatever it was, he should cut back. For 2 months, my wife and I deliberated over this, leaning negatively for probably the first 45 days. Our minister gave us a Daniel Bible study to do. And because I'm Norwegian, the first time through I didn't get a lot from it, but the second time through was a winner for me. The second time through this 21-day Bible study, the 6th day it said, perhaps it's time for you to let God decide where you'll use your talents. And that really made a difference for Mary and I. So on July 4th, 2015, we decided to run for the Senate. A year and a half later, we were fortunate enough to be victorious. And Senator Dave Osmek was kind enough to point out to me that he said, you know, Doc, for a rookie, he said, you got more votes in this election than any other Republican senator. In the first month in the Senate, I was asked to be on a conference committee to help provide premium relief for insurance, and that was a real honor. A couple weeks after that, Governor Dayton collapsed during his State of the State address, and I hustled up the aisle to see if I could be of assistance. Someone needed to take charge, and that's what I did. And initially, there had been a thought that he should be treated as if he were special, but he wasn't. He was a patient in distress. So you just take care of him. You don't worry about that he's a governor or anything else. So the first thing we did was I said, he's got to be in Trendelenburg position, lift the legs, get his head down. Let's get this person taken care of. Has he had a stroke? Has he had a heart attack? Is he having a seizure? Or has he fainted? Those are the things we had to sort out. Fortunately for Governor Dayton, he had fainted. And when he started to come around, he sweat like a horse. And someone said, holy cow, he sweat like a horse. And I said, you would too if you were a Democrat with a Republican doctor. That's the honest truth. A week later, when my wife and I went to visit Governor Dayton at the mansion for a function, Mary walked in. Mary went to veterinary school with Governor Dayton's sister, and he greeted her warmly. And then I walked through the door, and he threw up his hand and said, "Ah, my doctor." A year ago, Mary and I made a decision that we would not run for re-election. It was time to focus on family. The family has been growing. We have 6 grandchildren. None of them are over 3. Mary and I both had several surgeries, and it was time to get stronger and to see what God had in store for us coming up. We sort of thought that we would help get a Republican elected from our district, and we would sort of slide on out. But the second day of the session, I was asked by Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka if I would take over the insulin bill because it was going nowhere. And I said I would. 28 days later, we got it passed off the Senate floor unanimously. In order for it to get to the next step, I had to accept an invitation, which I was glad to do. When Governor Walz said, would you please come over to my office so the two of us can meet and figure out how to get this Republican Senate bill passed through the House, through the conference committee, and back to my desk. We did that. That was probably the last time he smiled at me. So before I make any comments about Governor Walz, I just want to remind you of something that's quite important. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Governor Walz has forgotten some of those phrases. He's dodged more than once. He was willing to throw a very young and inexperienced mayor of Minneapolis under the bus. Instead of talking about outstate Minnesota with respect, we've been relegated to cows and rocks. He dodged some of his responsibilities when he had the chance to be deployed when he was in the National Guard, instead stepping down. Instead of honoring the National Guard that he'd been a part of for so long, he called them a bunch of 19-year-old cooks. He's been insensitive to the impact of some of his decisions. He has terrorized the weakest and the most vulnerable among us. He created a pipeline of active COVID-19 disease into the nursing homes. And then when residents of the nursing homes got the disease, they were told that they wouldn't be able to leave. They were locked down. They were locked in. But the worst is yet to come. Their loved ones were repelled and kept out. And then the final. If the disease is going in the wrong direction and you think you might not make it through this, you'll die alone. And that's happened to hundreds and hundreds of Minnesotans across the land. He has functioned as an emperor. He has put into place legislative initiatives that couldn't be done through the normal channels. So we've seen an incredible expansion of government. One of the key issues here is going to be, do we have any confidence that the way the governor and his team want to manage the coming general election, do we have any confidence that this election will maintain the kind of integrity we have to have? That's why President Trump speaks of concerns regarding a transfer of power. Because first, before we have that, we have to have elections with integrity. And none of us can believe that Governor Walz is holding that as high a priority as we do. And lastly, he has absolutely thrown transparency to the wind. Last week, I didn't think that he could irritate me so much, but he did, when he said, we are no longer going to show you what the statewide census is for COVID-19 patients in the hospital and in the ICU. Well, let's go back 6 months and remember that we were told, be good soldiers, help us, do your part, because we need to depress the peak, delay the surge, so we can ensure that the hospital facilities aren't being overwhelmed. Well, they aren't being overwhelmed. And they're moving the goalposts. Because the only way you and I can know if they're being overwhelmed is if we remember first two statistics. In Minnesota, we have the capability of having 10,000 hospital beds. Please remember that number, 10,000 hospital beds. Of those, we know that 3,000 of them within 72 hours can function as an ICU bed. So we've got 10,000 and we've got 3,000. Now, when I look at the dashboard that the Department of Health puts out, and I see the number of people in the ICU with COVID-19 in the entire state of Minnesota is 300 or so, and it slowly whittles down to 130, I'm feeling pretty good that we're not overwhelming our hospital facilities. And if I see that out of the 10,000 beds, we only have 300 or 320 total COVID-19 patients in the hospital, I know that we are nowhere close to overwhelming our facilities, which means that we accomplished our goal. So at this point in time, really, the lockdowns, the school closures, the mask mandates, despite the fact that science for the last 30 years has never said that a cotton or a surgical mask can keep out a 0.1 micron particle. I know many of you haven't done this lately, but if you get a chance, get a magnifying glass, get a ruler, and go out and kill an ant. And then measure the gnat from his nose to his tail. He will be 1 millimeter in size. Then go out to your chain link fence and measure the distance between the two iron strands. That is 2 inches, which everybody knows is 51 millimeters. So if we have a 1 millimeter gnat and a 51 millimeter length, we know that it takes 51 gnats to line up next to each other in order for one of them to be blocked by the damn strand of wire. A COVID-19 particle, not a naked virus. A naked virus is 0.07 microns, but we'll go to a bigger particle. One that's got a little bit of protein and lipid on it, maybe a little bit of moisture, so it might have an H2O molecule on it. But a COVID-19 particle is 0.1 micron. A cotton or a surgical mask, the pore size is 5 microns. 0.1 micron, 5 microns, 50 times difference, just like the gnat and the chain link fence. So figure it out. You're not going to be able to stop COVID-19 particles with that kind of a mask. Now, could there be some collision between the COVID-19 particle and the lattice work of the mask? Sure there could be. But again, this is lulling yourself to sleep. I don't know if any of you have seen, but they have done videos where they have people vaping through a surgical or cotton mask with a colored smoke. And when you vape, you inspire, then you put your mask on and you blow it out. It doesn't just come out by your nose and over here by your cheeks and down here by your chin. It goes right through the mask. And that's because the smoke particles are larger than the COVID-19 particles, and they're still getting through. So we can wear masks, that's fine. I'm not going to die on that hill. But the fact of the matter is we should acknowledge that some of these decisions are absolutely bizarre. They're just bizarre. So now, let's talk about my troubles. On March 30th, I put in the Minneapolis Strip with Senator Jim Abler, a Republican, and Senator John Huffman, a Democrat, a commentary saying, and actually, I'm so glad that Frank Long's in the audience, because I talked to Frank about this. And part of the reason I was willing to participate in this commentary was because of a guy like Frank Long. Frank is a landscaper, but if you think that he just goes out and makes things pretty, you're wrong. Because what he does is he oftentimes will go out and he will try to help people mitigate the damaging effects of the winter freezing, the spring thaw, the water runoff, the collapsing tie walls. These are not small things. Sometimes the structure of the house itself is at risk. But Governor Walz's team didn't deem that kind of work as essential. Even if Frank worked alone, even if he worked with 3 others and they were always socially distancing. So in this commentary we said, there's a better way. Don't focus on an arbitrary decision between what's essential and what's not essential. Ask yourself what's safe and what's not safe. If you've got someone who's working alone or works with a crew and pays attention to what can be done, let's do the old-fashioned thing. Let's lean into the Minnesota citizen. Let's lean into the ingenuity of a small business person. That's what we asked for in this commentary. Well, I was asked by Chris Berg, a journalist in Fargo-Moorhead, if I would come on his program to talk about that on Tuesday night, April 7th. And I said, sure. So we got into a conversation. And in the conversation, he made some comment about the governor's models, which I haven't been a big fan of, because when he said 74,000 dead, I said, I don't think so. And then when he reduced it to 29,000, I said, I still don't think so. And then when he said by July we're going to have 1,000 people dying a day, I said, I don't know where you're getting this stuff, but this is crazy. And by the way, we have 2,000 total right now. 75% of those are dead in part because of his policies where he pipelined COVID-19 right into nursing homes. So don't give me that garbage. But anyway, while we're talking, Chris Berg says, well, what do you think about the models? And I said, well, here's the way it is. Minnesotans like it straight up. We don't need to be mollycoddled. So just tell us the facts. And I said, for instance, when I got that communication last Friday from the Department of Health telling me that I should go ahead and put COVID-19 on the death certificates of my patients that died, if I thought it might have been COVID-19, or if I assumed it might be COVID-19, or if it seemed like it might be COVID-19, or if COVID-19 might have contributed to it. And this was 180 degrees different than anything I've done for 35 years. When I do a death certificate, this is the last service I provide my patients. I have an obligation to do my best to try to figure out what was the sequence of causation. Because this is going to affect the patient's family, the generations to come, potentially estate planning, potentially wills. It'll impact on the data that we accumulate every year across our nation. When I tell you that 650,000 Americans die every year of heart disease, you want to know that that data matters. When I tell you that almost 10,000 Americans die every day, you want to know that because that helps you put into context what you're hearing in the media. So when I said this to Chris Berg, that I was being coached and massaged to more casually use COVID-19 as a diagnosis on a death certificate, he stopped me and he said, hold it, Doc. Would you repeat that? He was very alert. And I said, sure I can, and I did. Less than 24 hours later, I was being contacted by the Laura Ingraham show, and they said, we need to talk about it. Well, me being Norwegian, I don't know when to keep my mouth shut. So not only did I repeat myself for Laura Ingram, but then she said something about, well, why would this happen? And I said, well, when dollars intersect with healthcare, things get a little klutzy. And she said, well, can you understand any possible motivation? And I said, well, it might be that if you have garden variety pneumonia in a patient who's on Medicare, and they end up being discharged from the hospital will get $5,000 approximately for that patient, if it's a Medicare patient. But if you attach COVID-19 to that respiratory infection, the hospital will get paid $13,000. And if you use a ventilator to help that patient get through their pneumonia, the hospital will receive $39,000. Well, that really set off a firestorm, and so the next thing I knew was the USA Today was fact-checking me, and I remember the day they called me at the Senate Capitol. At the Capitol, we were in the Senate, and all of a sudden I was being interrogated by someone I never knew before out of New York, and I told him what had happened and how I learned this information, not knowing that they were doing a deep dive on who's this character, Scott Jensen. And fortunately, the USA Today about a week later came out and said, yes, Doc Jensen was telling the truth. This is true. 5,000, 13,000, 39,000. So my life started to change. So what did I really disagree with? I disagreed with the desire on the parts of some to evidently pad the numbers. Why? There's no reason to do that. We've never done that for influenza. We didn't do it for Ebola. We didn't do it for MERS. We didn't do it for SARS. We don't do that. But it wasn't just that. It was when the CDC came out and said, well, if you got a positive PCR test, we're going to add that to if you had positive antibodies. Well, they measured two totally different things. They should never have commingled that data. They made both columns of data worthless. Epidemiologists, virologists, and infectious disease people around the country said, what in the devil were they thinking? We kept seeing the potential for good data to help us be corrupted, and that bothered me. The next thing that bothered me was the invasion of our individual rights. When Governor Walz said that he was going to instruct the Department of Health to disseminate a list of all households in Minnesota with active COVID-19 disease to law enforcement agencies around the state so that first responders would know that they should be very careful going into those households, the ACLU came out against him. Well, that's odd because typically the ACLU leans his way. But they knew that this was a bad move because it's a violation of privacy, it's a violation of HIPAA, it's a violation of your individual rights, and worst of all, it does the worst thing possible to first responders. If you're a first responder and you go to a home that's not on the list, you don't have the ability to relax because you know from our own Department of Health people that for every documented case of COVID-19, we've got at least 10 more that we don't know about. So when you go to a household, first responding, you do what any good military person would do. You prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But you don't get lulled to sleep by the governor of the state. Next. The governor bothered me because he tried to use peacetime powers to expand his government. He used his executive orders to do things that he never could have done otherwise. He snuck in March, this little thing to the pharmacy board. He said, I don't care if doctors prescribe hydroxychloroquine, but don't you, pharmacy board, let the pharmacist dispense the medicine. So I got to dispense it till the cows came home. But I started to get patient calls and doctor calls saying, the pharmacist won't fill the med. In August, on the day before or the day of getting his executive powers renewed again, because of course the Democratic House was not going to leave him, he rescinded his order in March. He never told us why. Why in the peak of the disease in Minnesota did he take that option away? One of the big problems that my patients have with these policies of having bureaucrats tell doctors how to practice medicine is that it seems like we've been given in COVID-19 a binary choice. If you get it, you either get better or you don't. And if you don't, then you hang tight till you get bad enough to get in the hospital, and then You let the doctors decide if they'll put you on a ventilator, which kicks the death rate from 40% up to 80%. That's what happens with COVID-19. If I typically put a patient on a ventilator, I know they've got a 40% chance of dying. That's a serious deal. But if you put a person with COVID-19 on a ventilator, in New York City we learned that the chances of death are 80%. That's why we have so many ventilators still sitting on pallets, not yet unwrapped. That was predictable. We are not using ventilators very much. We'll use it if we can to stave off death, but there's better ways to do it. But patients have told me, Doc, why is it a binary choice? Why can't I do something at the early end? Why can't I use hydroxychloroquine because they're using it around the country? Why are we seeing some of the lowest death rates in countries where hydroxychloroquine is used casually to protect or prevent or treat malaria? My wife was on hydroxychloroquine for 15 years for rheumatoid arthritis. If she got COVID-19, do you think I would hesitate for a moment to take out that old bottle of pills and put her on? Not for a moment. And if I could share you just one side story. Last week I found out that I had COVID-19. I didn't know it. I was one of those who skated through it. About 6 weeks ago, I noticed that I was starting to sneeze, had a little runny nose, a little scratchy throat, but it was late August, and I always get allergies. So what do? I take Zyrtec. What does that make me? Tired. Got to drink more coffee. I didn't think much of it. After a few days, I started getting better. Once my wife told me to quit taking the antihistamines, I got less tired. But I found out that a friend of mine who I'd been with that weekend had also been sick that weekend. He had different symptoms: headache, fatigue, diarrhea. He got tested. He was positive for COVID antibodies, a blood test. Serology is what it's called. So I thought, well, maybe I better as well. So I did, and I rejoiced when I was called with the result. They said, you've got COVID-19 antibodies. I mean, I felt luckier than lucky, because I'm one of those people that's got it, and I know I've gotten it. I can't give it to you, and I can't get it from you. So tonight, if you notice that I was pretty liberal about shaking your hand, I'm not too worried about you or me. And lastly, what I objected to, I've already mentioned the data corruption, the invasion of our rights, the expansion of government power. And the last thing that bothered me is that Governor Walz and his team have terrorized the vulnerable among us. Yep. Governor Walz has presented himself as being terribly concerned, and that's why he's going to put masks on all of us. Never been done before. Typically what you do is you try to take care of the vulnerable. In this situation, Governor Walz's policies have harmed the vulnerable in long-term care facilities to an unbelievable level. And we will all have to live with that legacy. Now, I normally don't do a lot of reading, but tonight, as I talk about a fear formula, I want to read just a couple things. This is from the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, 10 years ago. From the very moment that the first cases of swine flu reached Scotland last April, panic had already begun sweeping across the whole length and breadth of Britain. During the early stages of the outbreak, there was a feeling of muted anxiety among a large proportion of the population in anticipation of the impending threat. We move on. The society we live in today can be characterized as a politics of anxiety. Politicians and governments around the world are aware of this fact, and they reignite its status regularly, wittingly or unwittingly. Even more disturbingly, it can be argued people are inherently at the mercy of these government experts. 10 years ago. Is it any different today? Is it any different today? The fear formula goes like this. If you want to make something happen in the world of politics or in the world of bureaucracy, the first thing you do is you frighten folks. The next thing you do is you exaggerate whatever facts you can get a hold of. Then you accuse someone. Give people someone to blame. And when you're done with that, you repeat it. That's the recipe. Once you've established that base, you move into the word formula. You've already done the fear. You've frightened them, you've exaggerated, you've accused, and you repeat it. Now you move into formula. This is what gets good. Go ahead and grab fake news. Any factoid you can get a hold of, you use that. Then you ostracize your opponents. Anybody that speaks against you, go against them. Then you ridicule any possible solutions. Then you massage and manipulate the message. However, wherever you can. then you extend that big invitation for utopia. Come with me, follow me, and I will promise you utopia. I will take care of you. And at that point in time, you step forward and you lead. And you lead late in the game, because when you lead late, often your lies last the longest, and you get hammered the least. And then at the very end, you applaud yourself. You run victory laps you didn't earn. You tell people, didn't I get you through this? Mark my words, this is what we're going to see. When we get done with this, we are not going to see a light switch being flipped where people acknowledge that we overreacted, that we caused harm, that to put 5-year-olds in some sort of draconian, imprisoned classroom and told them to wear masks. How in the world can we think that that's okay? We have absolutely rooted. We have seen half of our country absolutely root for Sweden and South Dakota and North Dakota to fail. And they're not failing. They're not failing. So, it's time to live free. Let go of the shackles.
Yep.
If you're not in a long-term care facility and you get COVID-19, your chances of surviving are more than 99.9%. We had, in 2009, more than 1 billion people get swine flu around the globe. More than 1 billion. Do you know how many cases we're attributing right now to COVID-19 around the world? It's about 30 million. So we've got to go 30, 35 times that to get to that billion that the epidemiologists have indicated for 2009. America, we have about 25%, 20 to 25% of the cases and 20 to 25% of the deaths. Minnesota, we have about 1 to 1.5% of the cases and of the deaths. We have a chance to pivot. We're seeing 4 critical things go on over the last several weeks. We're seeing documented cases rise, and of course they will. We're testing the snot out of this disease. The second thing we're seeing is we're seeing hospital use drop. We're seeing ICU bed usage drop. That's why the Department of Health is not willing to show us those numbers anymore. Because if they show us those numbers, we might have the audacity to think for ourselves, come to a conclusion that they don't want us to come to. But the last thing that you have to remember is the fatality rate is dropping. So we are seeing this virus act just like viruses do. We never said in the beginning that we would squash this virus. We said that we wanted to make sure that we didn't overwhelm the healthcare facilities, and we would do that by depressing the peak, delaying the surge, so to speak, flattening the curve. We have done that. Our peak is past. It's you good folks that are going to inject the kind of common sense forward into the next month, the next 2 months, the next 8 months, that's going to make our country go. Yes, I'm on strike 2 with the Board of Medical Practice, but I'm reassured by the fact that nobody's accused me of doing a vasectomy and accidentally cutting off someone's ear. No one's accused me of diagnosing a hangnail while my patient was having a heart attack. What they've accused me of doing is providing reckless advice because I was willing to do that, which Dr. Fauci and Dr. Ostrom have done. They told me that I was spreading misinformation, but never mind the fact that the governor of Minnesota said that we're going to have 74,000 people dead, and we're going to have so many dead that we've got to go out and we've got to buy a $7 million building so we can stash the bodies. Yes. Never mind that wasn't spreading misinformation. I was spreading misinformation because I was willing to compare COVID-19 to influenza epidemics. And never mind the fact that COVID-19 and influenza viruses are single-stranded RNA viruses presenting with the same symptoms, a similar latency period, a similar incubation period, and we've been inflicted by them for hundreds of years, both. And so 2 weeks ago I found out that I'm now a danger to public health. I'm thinking of writing a note to Governor Walz and saying, no, I've already had COVID-19, so I'm not a danger to public health. So it's time to live free. I think we can be civil to one another. We can talk to one another. We can disagree with one another. But the fact of the matter is, COVID-19 is not an existential threat to humankind. It is a virus. It is a virus of which we've already incorporated into our society 5 or 6 other viruses. The question comes up, will we get immunity? Yes. Herd immunity is not a religion that you choose to believe in or not. Herd immunity is something that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. My wife, as a veterinarian, was the one who first introduced me to the concept because they talk about herd immunity a lot when they're looking at herds of cattle, trying to make sure that the whole herd is protected. And if they get to a certain percentage, they know that that small percentage that's not protected will still be protected because there will be no vector to bring the disease in. We will get there. We will get there probably 4 different ways. 3 for sure. 1, disease resistance. When Jesus walked this earth, you wonder why there wasn't an absolute pandemic of leprosy? It's because we know that 90% of the population couldn't get leprosy if they wanted to put it on their Cheerios in the morning. You couldn't do it. A small percentage of the population is actually susceptible to leprosy. There's a disease resistance. The second kind of immunity we have is cellular immunity. That's the kind of immunity we get against tuberculosis and diseases like that. The third kind of immunity we get is called humoral immunity. That's the antibodies. That's what I was found to have last week. That's what we get against mono. That's what we get against so many diseases. And the fourth mechanism is a passive immunity. And that's a vaccine. And that may or may not come to pass. We'd be silly to think that we should assume that it'll happen. It may or may not. And if it does, if we think we are having struggles now in terms of rising up and engaging, we have got to rise up like never before if government tries to tell us that COVID-19 vaccine is mandatory. Because it cannot. I'm going to ask Frank Long and my wife to distribute to each table a copy of my book. I'm going to give each table a gift of a copy, and you can on each table decide who gets it. And thank you for being such a wonderful audience.
I know there were 2 of you that said you had a question. So just come on up. We don't have time for dozens, but just come on up. Okay.
Is this mask useless?
Yes.
The mask is being held up as a surgical mask. Surgical masks are used to do 2 things. When we're doing surgery, if we accidentally cough or sneeze, what it'll do is it'll keep us from disseminating large particles greater than 5 microns into the surgical field. The other thing it does is it prevents a patient's blood from getting into our mouth because red blood cells are 7 microns, and if all of a sudden we hit a bleeder and it starts to splash towards our eye, we won't get that. But the actual pore size in a mask such as this is 15 microns. And that's why we make it 3-ply. Because when we put 3-ply, we take the 15 microns down to an effective 5 micron pore, and 0.1 micron is what a COVID-19 is. So it has 50 pieces can get through it. Yes, you'll have some collision of virus against the lattice work, but you're lulling yourself to sleep if you think that's going to protect you against COVID-19.
Would an N95 mask protect?
An N95 mask has 3 characteristics in addition. It protects people. N95 mask will cause filtering of 0.3 micron particles, which is still larger than the COVID-19 particle. but it's charged with electrostatic polymers. It's made in a melded fashion, so it's not woven, and it has a different kind of lattice structure. And all three of those things will cause COVID-19 particles to clump and hit against the lattice work. So it's a fairly good mask. But remember, most N95 masks have an exhaust valve. So if you wear one, you're protecting yourself, but you're doing nothing for the other person. Next question.
My question is, we've seen Governor Walz keep extending his emergency powers month after month after month. Do you have any, this is with
We can't hear up here.
Please think outside.
Thank you.
Thank you.
do you have any wisdom on what, I mean, it doesn't look like the House is going to want to go along with taking these emergency powers away from the governor. So do you have any guesstimate of how long this thing might go on with the governor trying to exercise these orders?
The question is, the governor continues to extend his powers. I learned today that we'll probably be called back October 12th. I would love to, what's that?
No surprise.
Yeah. I would love to give you an optimistic answer, but quite frankly, I think Governor Walz is going to run the table. There is no way we can stop it. The legislation that's in place is sloppy, it gives him far too much latitude, and it has to be one of the first priorities of fixing moving forward. But the fact of the matter is, if the House doesn't vote to take away his powers, it doesn't matter what the Senate does.
Yeah.
And Governor Walz is an ill-tempered, thin-skinned individual who, if you go against him, I mean, I have seen twice at the Capitol at about 10 o'clock at night, Governor Walz driving into the Capitol because he's had 2 or 3 Democrats that have crossed over and voted with us, once on the bonding bill and once on taking away the powers. And it was only an hour after he'd been there that I heard the rumblings and saw the text messages that if those Democrats stepped out of line again, there would not be a bonding project in their district for a long time to come. So the fact of the matter is, I think Governor Walz is going to run the table as long as he can and as long as he wants to, and I don't know how we can stop it.
Okay, I'll just say that on the table is a sheet of 4 Democrat state representatives with their contact info. You could start out by calling and inundating their phone and their email to tell them to reverse this. Okay, next. John, real quick.
Senator Jensen, it was pretty clear by the end of May that the health department was being very incompetently run and causing a lot of collateral damage with this emergency policy. I'm just wondering what's prevented the Senate from going after the confirmation of the law.
The question has to do with why hasn't the Senate done something in regards to the Commissioner of the Department of Health, Commissioner Jack Malcolm. Those decisions, quite honestly, are made by the leadership team, and the decision, there were some of us that wanted to start doing some of this earlier and basically go after people that had been identified by the leadership, and they'd had conversations with Governor Walz. We've done that to Kelly. We did it to Lepping. The governor had been notified in advance. That was no surprise. He might have acted like he didn't know, but he did know that we weren't satisfied. We weren't happy. We didn't think that they were doing their job. They're not supposed to be partisan. They're supposed to be commissioner of something that helps make things work in Minnesota. But in terms of any other commissioners, that generally has been a leadership thing, and I'm not going to try to stomp my foot or bang my fist on the table. The leadership of the Senate determines that.
Doctor, real quick, have we reached depletion of susceptibles? And you might have to explain that to the crowd.
The question is, have we reached the depletion of the susceptibles? I don't think we have yet, but we're definitely nearing it. I mean, if you look at some of the states, initially we had heard 65, 70% to get herd immunity, but that was assuming that there was only one mechanism of active immunity being, if you will, sought after, and that would be the antibodies, the humoral immunity. But we now know that cellular immunity is taking place at a substantial level. We also know that in a household, the transmission rate is only 17%. What am I saying there? If you have mom and a dad and 5 kids, dad comes home with COVID-19. Out of the 6 other members of the family, over the next month, statistically, you will see only 1 other person get the disease. That tells us that something else is going on. It's very possible that other members of the family might develop cellular immunity. They wouldn't have measurable antibodies, but that doesn't mean that they're not immune. So we know that antibodies, cellular immunity, and then as I mentioned before regarding the leprosy, disease resistance. Those three things come together. So we may well be moving towards 65, 70% herd immunity and only need 20 to 30% with antibodies. And if you actually look at the history of pandemics and epidemics before, it's unusual for us to ever, as a population, get to more than 25 to 28% of the population having the antibodies that are measurable.
There are some people in Florida who are taking deaths and marking them date of death, not reported death. Do you know anywhere in Minnesota where we can get that information and maybe figure it out for ourselves?
The question has to do with the corruption of data. The question has to do, are we dating documents appropriately, and are we dating documents consistently? No. And that's why you occasionally see that we have 3 deaths on a Monday, 17 on a Tuesday, 2 on a Wednesday, and 12 on a Thursday. The fact of the matter is, what we should be looking at when it comes to deaths is we should look at a 7-day rolling average, because this data is being corrupted. We do know this. We know that we've had people like Deborah Birx and the Department of Health director in Illinois say, listen, just because it says COVID-19 is the cause of death on a death certificate doesn't mean that they died of COVID-19. Really? Gee, it says on the death certificate, the patient died of COVID-19, but that doesn't mean they died of COVID-19. They may well have died of congestive heart failure. That's how corrupted the data is. So where are we at? We are going to have to run a system-wide, nationwide audit when this is done. Because quite frankly, people are lining up, congressmen are lining up, trying to get a bigger chunk of the pie when it comes to distribution of dollars. We know it's happening already. We've seen the New Jersey and the New York congressmen and U.S. senators already vying. They think they should get more money than Minnesota because they were the ones who got hit the hardest. Follow the money.
We're going to take just these. I'm sorry. We've got one.
Doctor, I have 2 unrelated questions. First, regarding one type of testing, I've heard that if they don't get a hit initially, they'll amplify the sample. Did I hear 2 to the 40th power or some such thing? And second question regarding Governor Walton is the draconian rules on churches. What if all churches just rise up and do away with all the practices? What are you going to do to us?
2 questions. The second one I'll go with first. The question is, what about if all churches would rise up? Quite frankly, I think what we're doing to churches is terrible. I mean, what we need now more than ever is we need to recognize the impact of the desperation that's affecting us. We are all living under this cloud of melancholy. We don't even recognize it. It's affecting our daily lives. The things that we used to look forward to, the shine is off. We need churches. Churches are going to be one of the greatest sources of mental health than ever. We need them now more than ever. If someone said, we're just going to go ahead and worship the way we always worship, I would be there in a moment. So I would love to see us do that. You could call that civil disobedience. The other question had to do with, it's a little more technical. There's 3 kinds of tests you have to remember. There's PCR tests where we look for, think of the COVID-19 virus as a styrofoam ball about the size of an orange, and it's a white styrofoam ball. Then stick a bunch of golf tees in it. Now you got COVID. The white part is the RNA. The things, the T's sticking out, those are the receptors. So we have 2 kinds of tests. We have one that goes after the RNA. That's called the PCR test. We have another test now that's being done, and that's the antigen. And we're trying to measure, we're trying to read off the T's, and that's another one. And then the other one is looking in the rearview mirror, the blood test that I had, where we're looking for antibodies. The question has to do with PCR testing. If we're looking for a snippet, we're not looking for the whole RNA virus. We're just looking for a little snippet, maybe 16, 20 bases out of 100,000 bases. Well, it's sort of like if you come in and I'm checking your hearing, and I give you a sound at a certain frequency, and I give it to you at a certain level of decibels, and you don't hear it. I increase it. You don't hear it. I increase it again. If I increase it to 120 decibels, that's like standing next to President Trump's plane taking off. If I get it to that level and you finally hear it, And I say, your hearing is fine. That would be silly. That's what we're doing with the PCR testing. We're running 40 cycles. Normally, if you run a cycle, every time you do a test, it doubles. So it goes 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Once you get to 25 cycles, it's almost never that you'd be able to grow virus out of that sample. So at that point in time, that person would be non-infectious. Normally, we will use a cutoff of 30 cycles or 33 cycles, but we very seldom go above that. With the testing we've been doing, it is not unusual for these manufacturers to have been allowed by the FDA to use 35, 38, 40, and even 45. When we're at 30, we're in the billions. When we're at 40, we're in the trillions. We can find a piece of DNA, DNA because we flip it over from RNA to DNA. Well, we can find a piece of DNA that might be nothing more than just a little dead DNA that's been lying around, might have gotten coughed up from your lungs. And we even have concerns, could that strand be from a different kind of coronavirus? That's the problem with the PCR testing. We've been overreading it. PCR was never meant to diagnose viral illness. It was invented, discovered in the 1980s when we were starting to do our work on AIDS, and what we wanted to do was get more HIV virus to work with. So we take an HIV virus, and in PCR, we could end up doubling, and we could get enough virus to do the kind of work we needed to do in the lab.
Wonderful. And I know so many of you have a question for Senator Jensen, but perhaps if you can ask him at the end after. We're going to take one more question here. So come on, you have been standing in for a while. So we only have time for one more question.
Could you explain Waltz's COVID pipeline into the nursing homes? I'm not sure what happened.
The question is, could I elaborate on what does it mean when I said I think that some of Governor Walz's and other governors created a pipeline of active COVID-19 disease into the nursing home? It's a great question, thank you. Basically what happens is patients were being discharged from the hospital, still potentially infectious with COVID-19, in an effort to keep the hospitals from getting too close to their maximum occupancy level. COVID-19 patients were discharged. Some of them were nursing home residents. The nursing homes were not allowed to screen those patients coming back into their facility to make certain that they didn't have COVID-19. We know that some of those patients that came back into the nursing home, in fact, did have active COVID-19 disease and were able to spread it to other residents. That's what we mean when we say a pipeline was created through policies whereby active COVID-19 disease was brought into it. We also think there are potentially other ways for COVID-19 have been introduced into nursing homes as well, whether it would be through physicians, staff, people making rounds, and things like that. Folks, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful